Welcome to the Health Systems CIO Show. I'm your host, founder, and editor-in-chief, Anthony Guerra. On today's episode, I'll be speaking with Ilo Romero, VP and Associate CIO with WVU Medicine. Ilo, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, hi, Anthony. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Do you want to start off by telling us a little bit about your organization and your role?
Yeah, certainly. So we are the largest health system private employer in the state of West Virginia. We have 25 hospitals, 39,000 employees, 3,500 licensed beds, more than 5 million clinic visits, and we have care sites across not just West Virginia, also Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Maryland. At the hospital level, I have a responsibility for IT in our north east region, and I have responsibility for Ruby Memorial Hospital, which is our flagship hospital, for our children's hospitals, for our Uniontown Hospital in Pennsylvania. I also have enterprise responsibility across all our 25 hospitals. I lead some of our most exciting areas: analytics, interoperability, software development, digital experience, and artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is a department I built from the ground up 6 years ago. And I like to say that I have one of the most fun jobs in healthcare IT. My job is essentially making healthcare smarter, smoother, and more connected.
Excellent. That's great. You have, like you said, you're in charge of a lot of very interesting areas. So, the reason I reached out to you wrote a piece where you discussed you had a conversation with some of the either a frontier AI provider or multiple. I'm not sure, but you had a conversation that you had some interactions. You were doing some research that left you coming away with some concerns about the state of affairs. So why don't you tell us about um, the genesis of those meetings? What were they about? What were you trying to do? And then what is the information you obtained in those meetings that left you a bit concerned? And then we'll go from there.
Yes, certainly. So in early January, the major AI frontier labs all made these big healthcare announcements within days of each other. OpenAI launched OpenAI for healthcare. Anthropic launched Cloud for healthcare. Google was pushing Gemini deeper into the enterprise. The headline from all of them was essentially the same: we support healthcare now, we are HIPAA ready. So we decided to engage with them because we actually have a lot of interest, and we have been sort of limited in some of the work that we have done internally with AI because of the concerns around having a HIPAA compliant environment. And so this was a great opportunity for us. And we went into these conversations as a willing partner. WVU Medicine already has a mature AI program. We have an internal delivery capability. We have enterprise governance for AI. We have a very real pipeline of clinical, operational, and administrative use cases. So what troubled me was not that frontier AI has a cost. Of course it does, right? These models are expensive to build and operate, and vendors should be compensated for real value. What troubled me was the structure of access, because in one engagement, HIPAA-ready access required a seven-figure dollar annual commitment. And we were even interested in potentially a strategic partnership where we will co-develop solutions for healthcare. And that was framed for us to get any opportunity to collaborate on a project that we will need to identify a use case that was like $100 million magnitude, where obviously they will take a material portion of the value out of that. And so below that, the available self-service path, which is what we had before, will not be HIPAA compliant and will not be appropriate for any use case in healthcare with PHI or sensitive information. So that made me step back and ask if the market is actually built for how healthcare adopts technology responsibly. Healthcare does not start with one massive clean ROI use case. I mean, yeah, you may have, some of those, but it really is more around many governed use cases, each with its own workflow, each in a different domain area with different owners, different budgets, different risk profiles. So for me, it came down to this. The headlines in January said, healthcare is open for business, but the fine print made me feel like it was open only for some of us.
Yeah, so you were surprised. It sounds like you came away from these meetings very surprised. You did not expect this kind of an encounter. And essentially, what we had here is a seller thinking they have put together something attractive for a buyer. The buyer thinks also that something attractive has been put together. There's a meeting at which you come away realizing what you've proposed is not something I can do anything with. So a mismatch between buyer and seller. And then people come away from those meetings and perhaps the seller, which would be the frontier AI providers, they either care or they don't. If they care, they try and change the offering to make it match what you said could work for you. Did you get a sense of if it was sort of a take it or leave it type presentation, meaning, okay, you're not interested, we're making plenty of money elsewhere, or were they very open to going back to the drawing board somewhat?
Well, in this specific case I'm referring to, no, they were not open. So they were just looking for the really big players. And the explanation they gave is that they have limited resources and that they cannot devote resources in a collaboration unless there is like a big target value. So that was the response I got. But really, it doesn't add up for the other piece, which is just having access to your HIPAA compliant environment, right? And so because then for many clinical operation use cases, if a platform cannot handle protected health information with the right agreement, with the right controls, that use case is off the table. Like we cannot
Right,
even work, right?
right.
So forget the collaboration. I understand they have limited resources. But if compliant access to these resources begins at seven figures, then the market is not pricing capability. It is deciding who gets to use the technology responsibly, right? And who doesn't. And so there has to be some sustainable path between like non-compliant self-service and a seven-figure enterprise commitment entry point. Right now, for many organizations, the only key to that compliant door costs seven figures, and the door is locked for everyone else, apparently. So here is the part that doesn't add up. If a vendor is serious about healthcare, the foundational investment is already made, right? Because the HIPAA environment, the BAA process, the security, the audit infrastructure, it has been already done. Yes, every new customer can add, some incremental cost, but it's not material, right? You already had the big investment of creating that environment. And so, yes, so there is some incremental cost, there is some liability, that's real, but it just doesn't add up to a seven-figure entry point.
Yeah, so the way you're describing it, there's sort of a major dividing line in their offering. Below a certain dollar figure is non-HIPAA compliant usage, and you said that essentially is useless to you. You can't do anything with it. And then if you want the HIPAA compliant offering, that's the big dollar amount that you
Well,
can't
no,
afford.
let me clarify, Anthony. They say you need to commit $1 million or more to get the HIPAA compliant.
Right.
So, right? And if you want to work together on a project, like $100 million. That's the piece. So forget, maybe we don't collaborate on the next
Right.
revolutionary solution. We just want to get access to your platform, to your endpoints, so that we can connect our own models, our own pipelines to your endpoints. That's what the entry point is, $1 million commitment. They still charge us for tokens consumed, but they want an upfront commitment, regardless of whether we use those tokens or not,
Right.
of $1 million. That was the part that bothered me. Uh, and, uh, and so probably an organization of our size will easily get to that number, right? But to me, it's more a matter of principle. I'm not going to play with that provider that sets the bar so high with no reason. That was the part for me.
Well, it sounds like, they're for-profit companies, right? So they're not, it may feel like, and you tell me your thoughts, but it may feel like they're utilities in a sense, or it may feel like they should be available to all, but they're for-profit companies and they can do whatever they want, right? They can, so that's the frustrating thing is it almost feels like a utility, that you should have access to, but it's not necessarily the case. They can say, we're not interested in working with you if you can't pay this price. And in every walk of life, in every area, money buys access to things. That's just the reality of a capitalistic society. Money buys access. So there will be a bifurcation in all industries and even in healthcare between those who can pay and will pay, and they will perhaps, elevate their care, and those who cannot pay. I mean, any thoughts there? I mean, am I thinking about this right?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That's what they're doing at this stage. They don't care, right? Some, not all, but that's where the disconnect is because in healthcare, I think the BAA, the HIPAA compliant environment, is not a premium feature. It's the price of admission. Essentially for me, compliance is the floor.
Sure,
It's not the ceiling,
sure.
right? And so that's where I think we have the big disconnect. It was uh, just I was set aback. I was surprised, but you're right. We have a model agnostic solution for us in anything we do that we can plug to anything we want out there. So no big deal. But it was just disappointed because
Yeah.
it's going to impact the organizations that cannot afford to have that entry point.
Yeah, it's very interesting the point you make about compliance being the floor. And we've seen this, I think, over the years, a lot of horizontal technology companies have tried to get into healthcare. A number of them have failed because it is complex. Um, and this to me, it sounds like a great way to tell the seriousness of someone that says they want to be in healthcare and says they want to partner with you and embrace the industry is to what degree have they gotten over the compliance hurdles that would allow you to work with them, right? You can do all the marketing you want about wanting to be in healthcare. You can call whatever model you want, healthcare this, healthcare that. But if they come into a meeting with you and they don't have the basic stakes to play compliance, you're not in healthcare. You're not really trying to get in healthcare, right?
Yeah, correct. Or if they're going to offer you that protected environment and those safeguards and those audits, and then I think that's where there is a mismatch. They want that I think unjustified entry point because it's not scaling with the size of all the organization in healthcare. Only the biggest organization will be able to afford that.
Right, right. So it was a bit of a disappointing conversation. You just mentioned before that because of the way you had been going about things, uh, being model agnostic, that you're still in a pretty good position. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about your strategies in this area and how and why the path you were going down leaves you in a pretty good position right now.
Yeah. So uh, So this goes back into when we started our AI department 6 years ago. We chose a model-agnostic strategy deliberately. We made this early decision to treat AI as a core infrastructure rather than something we outsource or we license or we depend on someone else's data center, which is the cloud, right? Of course, we have a lot of AI across applications, Epic being one of them. We are an Epic shop, right? And we have AI embedded in many other of our enterprise applications. But what I'm talking about is what we decided to build as part of our own journey with our internal resources. And so that meant building the foundation in-house. We host our own servers. We use open source models. We have a HIPAA-compliant environment where PHI and sensitive information is safe because no information leaves our data center. It's protected, it's auditable, and we thought about this because we were in the early days when we started in the early days of AI and in the early days, at least for large language models, they didn't come out yet. But we were in those early days where we have a lot of concern of sending anything in the cloud. Yes, you can have agreements with vendors where you have a segregated environment, but our legal was also being very strict about what we could and we couldn't do. And so we created this essentially very safe, self-contained environment. And it proved to be a good choice in many regards. So fast forward to where we are today. Today, every employee across our organization has access to a ChatGPT style interface, the ability to chat with this in a secure way, the ability to build their own knowledge bases. So we have they can build their own RAG workflows. So retrieval augmented generation is that technique where essentially you create a knowledge base and then you can chat against your documents, against your policies, against anything you put together. We give that ability at the level of the individual employee and individual department. They are able to share this with their colleagues. We have self-service tools like Copilot style. Think about meeting minutes, right? But the beauty is we don't have to pay the licenses for it because it's all in our own environment. We have custom models that help us with detailed contract reviews. We have custom models that help us with interview preparation. We are able to ingest any type of content with these self-service tools for every employee. Example, webinar link. You put that webinar link, you really wanted to go to that webinar and you missed it. Hey, you just put the link and then you can get a summary or chat against the webinar and get the information you want, right? We created all these tools. We even created a professional mentor, conflict resolution advisor, communication coach for the workplace that is available to everyone. So this on the employee side. We built also our internal team, talent that we develop in-house that is producing a lot of these employee-facing tools, but it's also producing a lot of building blocks, reusable components that we're able to use across many domains. So we have ingestions pipelines for different types of data. We have obviously standardized RAG pipelines that have been optimized for very specific use cases. We have evaluation harnesses. We have automation. We essentially, the marginal cost that we have when we add the next solution, the next workflow optimization keeps dropping because we keep building these reusable components. And it has produced real results because we have custom predictive models, for example, for our population team that outperform the models in Epic. We have for our ambulatory operations, we have a no-show prediction model that runs continuously across every ambulatory patient and cut down our no-show rate by 23%, which cutting down that no-show rate, being able to repurpose those appointments has allowed us to capture the equivalent of $3.5 million in revenue that otherwise would have been lost, right? We have a coverage discovery bot that checks and resolved account about around 10 payer portals. That's also saving millions of dollars every year. And so we have a call center tool. This actually is an interesting one. We have a call center tool that essentially analyzes every call that comes to our main call center, analyzes the call, checks for quality items, and was the call courteous? Did the agent use niceties? Did the agent repeat the appointment information back, including the day of the week of the appointment? We check for specific quality things. And then we create a very easy to use user interface that allows to do essentially check the performance of our agents, and it's used for incentives, but it's used also to address potential problems. This was actually one of our early use cases that we developed, because this is one where we actually did a side-by-side comparison between what it was the cost of doing it internally on our servers and what was the cost of doing it on the cloud. And we found out that when we are able to run these models in our own data center with our own GPUs, the cost is about a quarter of what is if you pay the cloud provider. And so there is actually an economy there. But here is the honest part, because I think this is where the conversation gets interesting for CIOs. Open source models are roughly one generation behind the frontier models. And so for a lot of what we do, that is fine, like summarization, classification, structured extraction, internal chat. Open source can handle it very well and at a fraction of the cost. But agentic workflows change that calculus, because when you are chaining reasoning, tool use, multi-step planning, the gap becomes important, and it's the difference between actually a workflow that finishes and one that doesn't. And so that was one aspect. The other is recently we have seen some change in the economics of self-hosting that moved against us, because GPU pricing has climbed steeply over the last year. And so standing up the next tier of capacity on our own data center has become cost prohibitive. So we are going to use cloud endpoints, modern cloud endpoints for some of our use cases, either because we don't have enough capacity anymore and it's too expensive to buy right now, or because we need that frontier level intelligence for the agentic workflows.
Yeah,
that's not a retreat from the strategy. That's exactly what the strategy is designed to do. Why? Because from day one, we build a platform so that every model call is standardized so that you can call an endpoint. And the application doesn't need to know whether that endpoint is a GPU in our data center or is a GPU in one of the frontier model labs or in one of the cloud providers. We can route any workload to any of these endpoints. And really, we just have to decide by cost, by latency, by sensitivity, by capability. And that gives us essentially that flexibility that we otherwise we wouldn't have. So the part I would like to offer to other CIOs is a headline, of open source versus proprietary can miss the point. The advantage is not where a model lives, it's essentially owning the integration layer above it. And so the model you choose today, maybe it's not the model you choose in 18 months. The decision always starts with the workflow or the use case. How sensitive is the data? How much reasoning you need? What's the risk if the answer is wrong? What's the cost at scale? What's the integration burden? Which are the monitoring requirements? Essentially, we match the tool to the problem. And that gives us optionality and leverage. Sorry for the long-winded
No,
answer, but I thought it was important to share how we are not loyal to a model or a vendor. We are really loyal to the workflow, the patient, and the economics.
yeah, no, it's great. That's great. Um, so you mentioned data centers, running your data centers. That's a business that for a long time CIOs wanted to get out of. They wanted to everything in the cloud. They wanted nothing to do with data centers. But you see advantage in running your own data center, especially I guess in this new environment of AI. Although you mentioned that the economics are getting a little more challenging to where you may leverage some cloud hosting because of the increasing costs. So tell me, first, let's talk about data centers. People seem to want to get out of that business, but you're saying right now it's good to have some data centers. Take me through that a little more.
Yes, absolutely. So to me, the the idea of having hosting your own servers and your own GPUs is what gives us that level of independence that otherwise we wouldn't have. We will be at the mercy of the cloud providers. We will be at the mercy of things also getting out of control. Sometimes you may be experimenting, testing something, and be surprised by a bill at the end of the month because someone launched some complex pipeline that
Yeah,
was looping and
right,
getting crazy, and then shows up at the end of the month with a $50,000 bill that you didn't expect because it consumed so many tokens. When you host it in your data center, you have total control. You see, you have better visibility into your consumption, into your capacity. Now, is it perfect? No, because you are constrained by how much computing power you have in your data center.
right, right.
And so I know that the model that we just adopt is also used by different vendors. They also host many vendors we work with and interacted with host their own servers, and where they use the cloud is the last mile. So sometimes during peak hours, you run out of capacity and then you start sending those to the cloud, right? That could be a good one because the cloud gives you the ability to scale, gives you the ability to not have to worry about the constraints of your capacity. And so that's the benefit, right? So you can contain costs, you have more control. For us, it was actually really good in terms of the ability to provide all these internal tools. Anthony, if I could show you the tools we serve to our employees,
Yeah,
I find it really cool. And that's not something that you can buy. You have pieces of it, like you could buy, a Copilot license here. You could buy a ChatGPT subscription there. You could buy like different pieces disconnected. We get it all in one place, and we give abilities that our employees wouldn't have in a secure environment. And so that ability that you can run your own custom models has been game changing. Let me give you an example. Uh, uh, After we started some of our AI literary sessions, I had one manager approach and say, "Hey, we would like to understand if we can use this tool because we receive these referral faxes that are 30, 40 pages dense with information. And then we have to digest all this information and synthesize it and really extract only these 10 pieces and put them in the EHR. And it's like very time consuming." And they were able to prototype using one of our internal tools the entire workflow, how our ingestion actually, even if there was handwritten in the fax, like it will ingest that document, you will give the 10 headlines that you were looking for, it will actually synthesize information under those 10 headings ready for you to type. So that was a success story coming actually from people saying, oh, we can do this. And of course, next thing you know, we're automating the whole thing. So they don't even have to type in Epic the information. We automated the entire workflow. So this is the power when you have you host your own solutions. It gives you a level of flexibility that you wouldn't have. And also, I think it gives access that either will be very expensive or disconnected in many different places.
All right, very good. So that's sort of the data center analysis. You got to run some of your own data centers. You can use the cloud as supplemental. It works, seems to work very well for you. Um,
Anthony, there is more to it
yeah.
because you want to use the cloud. Open source models are one generation behind. We're getting into agentic workflows. Those really require advanced reasoning. I wouldn't feel comfortable using one previous generation model for those agentic workflows. And so the stakes are high. And that's where I actually want to use the frontier models because they will give me the best results. So it goes back to what I was saying before. It depends on the use case. For most use cases, you can get away with your hosted solution and with an open source model. For some of the advanced use cases, especially when it comes to agentic workflows, especially when it comes to extracting information from the EHR, and for various purposes, whether it's closing care gaps, whether it's reviewing the extensive history of a very complex patient in the ICU, for those, you want to have more advanced capabilities. And so that's another reason why we would use frontier models from a cloud provider or ideally directly from one of the major players. Make sense?
Yeah, but I think what we were talking about at the beginning was the challenge of working with the frontier providers, correct? So you had the
Correct.
meeting to get the access that you say you need for the advanced agentic use cases, but that didn't work out so well. So where does that leave you?
Yeah, that leaves me with this. In our case, it's not a big problem for us because we have the flexibility that we already have an established relationship with a big cloud provider. So we won't be able to access directly. I don't want to access directly the frontier provider, right? The frontier lab provider. I'm not going to work directly with them. I'm going to work through a cloud provider which already hosts a lot of our services. We are also like a Microsoft shop, so we have access to Azure cloud and we have endpoints in the Azure cloud. And that's where we already have endpoints. That's where I was making also the comparison side by side between the cost in our data center and the cost in the cloud side by side. Right, so we already have that access, and I will continue to use that. For me, the disappointing part is I wish I could give the experience to our providers, to our some of our employees that have some of the most complex jobs. Have access directly to those environments HIPAA compliant on the frontier lab models, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but that's where you've hit sort of the roadblock in those
Yeah.
conversations.
And it's more a disappointment because I feel it for organizations that maybe don't have the options that we have.
Right,
And for organizations that then will be cut out from the opportunity. AI is a big multiplier of efficiency,
right.
and they are going to be left out.
Tell me, you mentioned an integration layer as being another component of this. Tell me a little bit more about your thoughts around that.
Uh, they well,
Integration, you said, I think you were saying that when you're running your own data center, that integration becomes a little easier than if you were solely in the cloud. But just your thoughts around integration with applications and all these kind of things.
when it comes to AI, we just use standardized calls to endpoints. And then we use reusable components that we can use across domains. So every time we build something, we don't just build for one specific solution. We try to break it down in which are the different components that can help us address that specific workflow. And then we are able to reuse some of those components across multiple workflows, multiple use cases. And everything we do within each of these components is standardized so that they can talk to each other.
Right.
And also we are agnostic in terms of which endpoints we use, whether we are using an endpoint on the cloud or we're using an endpoint from one of the GPUs on our data center.
Very good. What you mentioned you're an Epic shop, right?
Yeah.
Correct? Yeah. So, a lot of discussion, debate coming up recently around, well, it always has been around point solutions. This comes up a lot around sort of ambient listening. Whether, Epic's got a tool now in ambient listening. They didn't used to have one. They were partnering. A number of organizations have gone on different point solutions. Some of them are going back to the Epic in-house solution now. Do you have any thoughts when it comes to these different point solutions, and perhaps some of you users want a specific point solution outside of Epic, and you need to evaluate that and decide if you're going to go with the Epic in-house tool or with a point solution and integrate it? How do you usually handle those discussions?
All right. So we look at it through different lenses. So we look at workflow fit, we look at capability, we look at cost, we look at risk, we look at maturity. So of course, Epic Native has real advantages because especially when it's deeply integrated, it's operationally mature, and it's strong enough for the workflow, right? It's good because it lowers that integration burden, it simplifies support, and so it's our preferred approach whenever Epic has it because it simplifies so many things. But at the same time, best of breed wins when the capability is meaningfully ahead.
Right.
We have a couple of examples. You mentioned ambient listening, one of them. So we use that best of breed when adoption is proven and the user experience and the economics justify it. So talking about ambient documentation is a good example. The market there moved fast. We use a bridge. They earned a real clinical trust, and we scaled it because it delivered. Now, of course, Epic has a native option that is maturing right behind it. And by the way, we even prototyped our own in-house developed ambient
Ah,
capabilities to target areas potentially not covered by a bridge or Epic, right? So the bottom line is we try to architect around the capability, not the product. So, documentation, revenue cycle, assistance, patient communication, referral automation, care gap outreach are capabilities. The underlying engine may change over time. So, what is best of breed today can be native tomorrow.
right.
Yeah, the worst place is to be locked into a decision that you cannot change.
Right. Very good. You touched on the idea of building. I've heard a lot of people say that building now is more of an option than it's ever been before because a lot of the capabilities and tools out there. So previously, perhaps the decision point was, do you go with your EMR vendor's tool? Do you go with a niche tool? But now more than ever, it's do we build our own? So, do you agree that now building has become more of an option for health systems than it has been in the past?
Oh, it was an option before. Now it's even more than an option. So there are solutions out there that are not rocket science. And there are vendors that charge ridiculous amounts for things that are not that hard to build. And so, of course, you don't want to get into the burden of having to support an application that only your organization uses, right? So there are many decisions that play into it. The economics have to justify, the scale has to justify it. But we have been building a lot of solutions internally since we started our own AI department. That's a fact, right? Today is unbelievable how things are moving so quickly. Like you don't need to be an expert in coding software to actually prototype something and prototype something literally in hours. And something that in the past would have taken us weeks or months, it can be done in hours. So it's an incredible change. I'm, sometimes scared about it, but also excited about it, and it's addictive too. Like you feel so powerful, and because essentially, really, your skill becomes the ability to know how to prompt, to know how to ask the questions, to know how to architect a solution, to know how to bring different pieces together and break down a problem. So it's a kind of a new set of skills that you need to develop. You don't need to invest any more the time to develop the skill of coding. And so that's one example. So essentially, the ability to build your own solution is more accessible than ever before because you can iterate very quickly. So goes back also to the economics. It needs to make sense. You don't want to take on. There are solutions that we just go with a vendor solution, even if we know it's not a big deal to build it, because we don't want to deal even with the liability aspects of it, right? Or because we don't want to become enslaved by the continuous updates of changes in the market of regulations. So you need to choose what you build, but it makes absolute sense, and that's what we have been doing. Like since we started our AI department, we have built. Last time I tracked, we had 68 different solutions across a dozen of domains. That it made sense to build for us.
Very good. It seems, I think it's reality to say that there's updates to the capabilities of these tools every day, or certainly every week. The large LLMs, as you mentioned, Gemini or ChatGPT or Anthropic, they're coming out with new capabilities certainly every week, possibly every day. How do you, as an IT executive, who is one of the people that is supposed to have answers for your organization, how do you stay on top of things as much as possible so that you don't want to be caught repeatedly being told things you didn't know? It's impossible not to have it happen with how fast things are going. But you do want to be the expert. All IT executives should be the experts for their organization. So how do you stay on top of things as much as possible?
Yeah. So I may be an odd case. So I do the usual things that other executives do, like I'm subscribed to newsletters, I get regular updates, I get updates even from my own teams, I go to conferences, I learn what is out there. But for me, some things get really interesting to the point that start bordering even my own hobbies beyond work. And so, for example, when we started our AI department many years ago, I just had the mandate to explore, the mandate from my boss to explore, hey, learn more about AI. It seems that it's going to be a big thing. Find out what you can find out. And so what I got intrigued. I'm an engineer by training. I started taking night classes, online classes on how to build my own machine learning models and how to. I went through all those resources available online from Google and others, and to the point that I have some basic skills and I like to understand the I like to have some level of understanding of the technologies that then I push our organization to adopt. So I may be an odd case in that sense because I apply some of my personal interests and hobbies, then back to my work. And so I get maybe to a level deeper that, it's not, may not be common, right? But I like to have that depth because I think it gives me a better understanding of what is possible. I have been in demos of vendors where they're showing something, and I will know right there exactly what they were using, even what open source solutions they were using. I could know right there. I was in a demo of an ambient solution, and at the end of the presentation, I went to talk to the CEO of this company and say, hey, by the way, I noticed that um, your model fails at diarization. Say, and he was surprised. Say, oh, we're working on that. And because it was not correctly separating who was actually speaking. And so if the patient was in this ambient solution that we're presenting, if the patient was more savvy and used some medical terminology, could be mistaken to be actually the provider speaking. And so I will be able to catch on these things. I will be able to also help guide our organization better to some of the solutions, including the environment that we have in our own data center. So I think it gives me some edge in that sense. But yes, in addition to the normal things that you will do, staying up to date and in the community and with your peers and with your vendors.
Yeah, well, I would say that what you're talking about, the fact that you use these tools and experiment with them, that's definitely what I see among the best, who I consider the leading practitioners in this space, the leading IT executives at health systems. The ones that give me the most confidence are the ones that are in there experimenting with these tools in their personal lives, at work, um, and sort of getting their hands in there. Absolutely. So you're not alone, but it is definitely the way to do it from my observation. We're almost out of time, Ilo. I wonder if you could give any final thought or piece of advice to your peers that you think has helped you be successful so far.
So, peer to say three things. First, build for portfolio value, right? You don't want to chase that one use case that is going to be the big hit. Like healthcare, for the most part, doesn't work that way. The value is in dozens or hundreds of smaller workflow wins, each one compounding into something transformational. So build a pipeline of opportunities, not just a pet project, right? The second is invest in your people. I think the organizations that win with AI in the next 5 years are not going to be the ones with the best models. They're going to be the ones with the most AI literate workforces.
Yeah, yeah.
Teach your teams how to leverage AI, how to recognize its limitations. I think that's the most durable investment that you can make right now. And then third, standardize. That has been our secret sauce, even when it's inconvenient. Standardized workflows, standardized data, governance. They're not bureaucracy. They are the runway. Without standards, every AI project, in general, every initiative becomes a one-off. And one-offs don't spread. With standards, one good idea can move across an entire enterprise.
Ilo, that was absolutely wonderful. Great stuff. It sounds like you're doing wonderful work. I appreciate your time today, and I hope we can catch up with you again down the road.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. This was great. Thank you, Anthony.
Have a great day, Ilo. Thank you.